Hi YouTube, Darth here. One of the things I found myself doing quite a bit of in the Battlefield 1 beta was flying. There were a couple of reasons for this. First, I've always loved flight simulators and I was curious as to how Battlefield 1 was going to treat biplane combat. Second, I wanted to get a head start on something I knew I would be doing a lot more of when the game launches. Finally, I jumped into biplane whenever my soldier wouldn't spawn with a weapon, which was unfortunately pretty frequent. In general, I found it to be about what I expected. The flying in Battlefield 1 reminded me of the much slower paced combat of Battlefield 1942, which is really appropriate for the World War I theme. I'm actually pretty confident that that alone opens up a lot more possibilities for fun plane combat for everyone. And for the most part, the combat in Battlefield 1 was a lot more diverse than it has been since the original Battlefield 1942. Starting with Battlefield 2, I feel like air combat got stuck in something of a rut in the Battlefield series. With BF2, we had high-speed jet combat which didn't make a lot of sense for a game with very short draw distances. That eventually got dropped from the series, but I can't say that the combat in Battlefield 3 or 4 was much more satisfying. I certainly did a lot more flying in Battlefield 4 than I did in Battlefield 3, but I was constantly irritated by the 313 model, where if pilots memorized how to fly at a very specific speed, they could very nearly win every engagement. From my piloting in the beta, I got the feeling that the 313 model, or rather the airspeed supremacy model, has been either discarded entirely or doesn't play as big of a role. To be honest, it reminded me a bit of the momentum-based maneuvering that DICE LA had been testing for Battlefield 4 on the CTE. That eventually got scrapped, but I felt like in Battlefield 1 the air combat had a lot more weight and sense to it than people striving for some arbitrary number. In a dogfight in BF1, a lot comes down to what you're flying. Bombers are going to pretty much lose to everything in the air, provided that their gunners are not cracked shots. But in general, I think with the exception of the bomber front seat, which is totally insane, the gunner seats are woefully underpowered. Unless your target is stupid and flies completely flat and level, or is half dead, your gunner isn't going to be taking out much. As for the rest of the dogfight matrix, attack planes lose to fighters, but are far better than fighters at getting ground kills. The classes of planes make enough sense, and there's different kinds of fun to be had in each one. I think that's a good pull from Battlefield 4, a game that was designed around rock, paper, scissors from the ground up. In general, though, I found the ability to affect the outcome on the ground to be pretty lacking. With only one point you can capture, only the attack plane had enough firepower with the cannon loadout to actually kill enemies at a good clip without being immediately targeted and shot down. Unlike the bomber, which had a lot of firepower but was immediately everybody's target. On the other hand, the cannon loadout was probably the most fun I had with the planes, as it one-shots other planes if you're good enough to land a shot, and is a good combination of firepower and accuracy. Compared to the attack plane, the other planes need to be brought up to parity. The bomber feels a bit weak, but mostly because the bomb sights seem to be a bit wonky. Additionally, it feels like the bombs need to respawn a bit faster on all the different planes, as I had to wait for a huge amount of time for the bombs to regenerate. It felt extremely long compared to, say, the JDAM in Battlefield 4, which was always available for my next pass on a target. The bombs and their splash radius felt somewhat weak, as they would rarely kill a target and almost never killed infantry. I also think the guns on planes could use a bit more anti-infantry power, maybe like the 25mm on the jets in BF4. But perhaps it'll all shake out fine as we get better with the planes after launch. I'd be afraid of making them too powerful, as there isn't much but stationary emplacements to counter air pros. So overall, the air combat felt pretty fulfilling for me. I'm actually excited to see a lot more of it on launch. I do hope that it's a bit more consequential to the ground situation, but even if it's not, that's not too much different from Battlefield 4, where you can't win the war from the air. It's about boots on the ground, boys. But what did you think of the planes in the Battlefield 1 open beta? Let me know in the comments below. Also, be sure to force choke that like button if you liked what you saw. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time, YouTube.